Should she tell him about her stomach cancer? Would he show any concern for her? Giselle kept asking herself these questions repeatedly, while the door was already being pushed open. She saw Jensen coming towards her, his face turning white with anger. "Where the hell have you been messing around? Look how many times I called you," he bellowed. Messing around? If going to the hospital for blood tests and a gastroscopy was considered messing around, then that was certainly the case. After all, she was about to cross the threshold of death. As she thought about this, her eyes began to burn, but Jensen did not notice Giselle's reddening eyes. He just continued to berate her for not answering his calls. Giselle took her phone out of her bag and shook it before him. "It's dead," she said. She had two phones, one for work and the other exclusively for waiting for Jensen's calls. These days, she had been suffering from stomach problems and had forgotten to charge her phone, which was why she had missed his calls on the way back. Is there an emergency? Who would Jensen be so anxious about to call her repeatedly? She doesn't even have to think about it to know who it is for. Just as she finished thinking this, Jensen grabbed her hand and pulled her outside. "Madeline is injured and has lost a lot of blood. Come with me to the hospital." Sure enough, all his anxiety was for Madeline. A surge of bitterness filled her heart. Madeline had a serious blood clotting disorder and had a rare blood type. Giselle happened to be the only one who could donate blood to her. She was soaked from head to toe by the rain, her seaweed-like long hair sticking to her back, her lips a shade of pale purple, and her hands as cold as ice. Jensen did not notice any of this. The hospital where Madeline was staying was only a 10-minute walk away. But Jensen was anxious and forcibly threw Giselle into the back seat of the car. As Jensen drove, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, he casually glanced at the rearview mirror and saw Giselle's pale and bloodless face. He involuntarily furrowed his brow and remarked, "Why is your face as white as a ghost?" Oh, he finally noticed. Giselle mockingly curled her lips and felt a lump in her throat like a bitter herb. She opened the car window and looked at the rain pouring down outside. Her body was frozen stiff. And the breath she exhaled turned into a cloud of frost. Her eyelashes trembled lightly. Jensen gave her a cold glance, but when he saw that she didn't speak, he somehow felt a sense of annoyance. He felt that something was off with Giselle today, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Whatever had happened to her had nothing to do with him. The most important thing right now was Madeline's health. With this in mind, he lightly pressed on the gas pedal, and the car picked up speed. When they arrived at the hospital, Jensen grabbed Giselle's hand and dragged her out of the car. Giselle hadn't even regained her footing when Jensen pulled her awkwardly and unsteadily behind him. He took her straight to the blood collection room and said to a nurse with icy eyes, "We're here." A bitter smile crossed Giselle's lips. Jensen trusted her blood more than he trusted her as a person. He didn't even bother a physical examination on her. What if the cancer cells in her body entered Madeline's body? Jensen's eyes narrowed. And a dangerous light shone from within as he leaned in, gripping Giselle's chin with one hand and said in a cold voice, "I just want to remind you not to forget our agreement. Of course, you can choose to go back now." Yes, she had promised him. That year, Madeline had a car accident in the city of Gupers, and because she wasn't been able to be sent to the hospital sooner, she suffered excessive bleeding from her wounds, and so was in urgent need of blood. Upon learning of Madeline's accident, Jensen had begged Giselle anxiously for help. And she had agreed. At the time, she had said that she wanted to get married to him. To him, that was her condition for her help. Giselle still remembered the shock in Jensen's eyes and the rising disgust he had for her at that time. From that moment, she knew that they could never get along well with each other. She had never thought of adding insult to injury and forcing him to do something he didn't want to do, especially when he needed her most. She was just joking with him. But this man was naturally dark. And he thought Giselle was forcing him. Giselle knew that Jensen hated being coerced into doing something he didn't want to do, so when she saw Jensen agree without hesitation, she thought he was genuinely willing to marry her. But now, thinking back, what a ridiculous misunderstanding. Giselle had never thought that her joke would bring such swift retribution. Now she was with terminal illness. I really deserved it. I'll do it, and besides, isn't this saving a life? Don't worry, I'm doing this voluntarily. Giselle smiled and sat in the chair. The nurse drawing blood had never seen such a frail and weak woman before. She stared at the pale, delicate wrist and asked in a low voice, "Can you continue?" Giselle shook her head weakly, her voice hoarse. "I'm fine. It was just a normal blood donation." But the nurse was afraid to continue. The woman's hand was too cold and already below normal body temperature. The last thing Giselle heard before passing out was Jensen asking the nurse, "Is that enough for Madeline?" How Jensen had become so heartless over the years.